If
And
you like
we're
the
back.
sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Lotierzo, part-time writer, full-time observer, joined by former 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, Jack Hirsch, the one and only. How are you?
Good, Frank. You always say we're back like we just left for commercial. It's been a whole week, Frank.
Exactly, but we're back on the air.
You remind me of a
Jack, before you get me all tongue-tied, something...
Milk, and then he comes back 2 weeks later and says, oh, I'm back.
We're back on. Jack, by the way, now look, we don't have much of a schedule. There's not much going on right now. We'll try to touch on appropriate things. But as we were coming on, something just hit me. The picture of you in the show intro, how long ago was that picture?
Oh, I don't know. I'm usually not paying attention at the time. I'm kind of... You know, it's like when you...
Because I'm trying to gauge how well you've aged. Because the picture of me is from 2011. That's 14 years ago. And I don't think I've aged that bad.
Well, I've aged. I mean, in the half, so on. But, you know, like these fighters, Frank, they don't feel they age. They make comebacks to the ring. They say they're as good as they've ever been. They don't feel they've lost anything. They say they're better than they ever have. And they're coming off a long layoff and they're older. That's the mentality.
But Jack, think about this though. We can't see ourselves age. Just like when I look in the picture that is on the show, that's from 11 years ago or 14 years ago. I look and think, I don't think I've really aged that much. But you can't see it. I remember when Muhammad Ali fought Leon Spinks. And he was adamant. He got his weight down. He did more running, more sit-ups, more sparring than he ever did for any other fight. So I'm all pumped up. I'm thinking, wow, he's going to look great tonight. And I'm sure when he looked in the mirror, the full-length mirror, when he looked at himself, he saw the same guy that stood in front of that mirror in 67 when he fought Foley and Williams. I'm sorry, Foley and Terrell. And the night of the Spinks fight comes, Jack, and he's clearly nowhere the same guy as he was. And so I think it's hard for the athlete, the fighter, whomever, if they get their weight down and their body looks in shape, I think they always feel they're the same.
Well, Ali didn't train harder for the Spinks rematch than he did for any other fight. I have to correct you. His longest training...
He said he did, Jack.
He said a lot of things. He'd always say he was in the best shape of this or that. He'd be in La La Land, Ali, making things up.
Well, he did say that a lot, Jack.
He trained well for the rematch. But Ali always said he needed a good 6 weeks of training. To him, that was a long training camp. But for the second Frazier fight, he actually was in camp like 12 weeks. That was his longest real training camp ever. But normally he came upon the 6-week formula. And he'd always talk about it, a good 6 weeks of training. Even when he was out of the ring for 3 years, and they talked to Ali about fighting Frazier during the first time, before he got the license to fight, he says, oh, if I get the license, if I could put in a good 6 weeks of training, that was his guideline. Now that's not quite enough for a lot of fighters. I mean, they go to camp 10 weeks or whatever. You know, it depends on the particular fighter.
Well, Ali did go away. He trained 10 months for Foreman just about. He never stopped training after the Frazier rematch. But yeah, that was about his average. But Jack, I did read multiple articles where he said he put more miles in, more rounds sparring, and more sit-ups and calisthenics for the rematch with Spinks than he ever did. So, his body did look fit then.
But I'm going to tell you.
But Jack,
yeah. The
Well,
Ali.
no, I was just going to touch on you said about
Frank,
nostalgia.
you're pausing to give me an opening to talk, and then you cut in. Now you're hitting me with a counter
Go.
hook. You're setting these traps, Frank, like on the ropes, telling me to come in, to punch, and then you're countering quick.
And I'm more of a bulldog like Smoking Joe,
Yeah.
Jack. I'm all offense.
Yeah, I mean, I thought you're more like Jerry Quarry. Remember early in Quarry's career, he'd set these traps on the ropes. He specialized in that early on. How come he stopped doing that? He was great at setting traps early.
It stopped working because the guy stopped following him to the ropes.
Well, Jimmy Ellis wouldn't follow him to the ropes. But then after the Ellis fight, he didn't do it anymore. And that was one of, he tried doing it in the first Ali fight. Remember? He backed into counter. And
Yeah.
Ali beat him to the punch, blinding combinations. But fighters in general, Frank, they take more time off and do nothing than the time they put in training camp. Out of 52 weeks out of the year, how many weeks do you think fighters are actually training hard, really hard? I'd say only about...
If they don't have a fight?
Well, they don't have a fight most of the time. Keep that in mind.
I don't think they're training much.
So there you go. So they're more inactive than they are active, training hard. And now let me throw this at you, Frank. World-class athletes in track and field. How often are they not training? They're training hard between meets. And
I agree. I'll give you two fighters who train like that, who never got out of shape from their pro debut until their last fight. And their current. Could you guess them?
Well, one would be Mayweather.
Mayweather's one.
You got to give us two. And the other who trained hard.
Never let himself get out of shape, Jack. Never.
And we're talking,
never had trouble making weight. Was always in shape.
Okay.
Strict with his diet.
I would guess Andre Ward.
Andre Ward could be added to the list, but I was thinking more Bernard Hopkins.
Bernard Hopkins. Yeah, absolutely.
I think he and Mayweather wrote the book on that, and they're the template of what a fighter should do on their downtime.
Right, exactly. The downtime would be at the gym. Don't misunderstand me. You need to take off a few days now and then. But you have a hard fight. You don't need to take off more than 2 weeks. I'm not saying to getting back sparring again. Take off 1 week after a hard fight. Then start doing some light jogging, doing shadow boxing,
Yes.
hitting the speed back, and then
build a sweat.
We get to that the heavy bag. You don't have to spar for a couple of months. I get that, okay? But there's no reason why you can't be in physical shape and work hard. And especially you're an elite fighter. There's no reason on your downtime between fights that you can't put in an hour and a half. A day, just keeping in shape. People do that all the time, going to gyms
Right.
and then getting paid for it.
Jack, speaking of Hopkins, I saw a post on Ben Dowdy's page before we came on the air. And he posted a quote from Kelly Pavlik that said that he would have favored Triple G to beat Marvin Hagler. He thinks that he was too big for Hagler. He thinks he had the power to hurt Hagler. He had the chin to stand up to Hagler. And he thinks that we look at a lot of fighters back in the day. So I guess I'll say fighters pre-2000, the guys like you and I, we look at them through rose-colored glasses and nostalgia. Now, I'll just say this. I think a lot of Triple G, and I do think in some circles, Hagler is plaster sainted. But I can't agree with Kelly Pavlik. A middleweight is still 160 pounds. Hagler had the better jab. He had better footwork. And I just think he would have beat Triple G by decision.
We judge fighters too much of the time on one fight, especially when they fight against one another. And I kind of like to use this formula, Frank. If they fought a few times, best 4 out of 7, would one fighter win all four. Okay, and if you put Hagler against Triple G, best 4 out of 7, neither guy would sweep. Neither guy would sweep. I couldn't see Hagler winning 4-0, over Triple G. But for one fight, the two of them at their best, as far as what Pavlik said, Hagler was never hurt during his career, not even hurt.
Either was Gigi.
Triple G wasn't either. Okay, but the point that Pavlik was trying to make is that Triple G would hurt Hagler. Okay?
Yeah, I disagree.
I think it's a very tough fight for Hagler, but Hagler could go to plan B, just box, fight very
He was more versatile. Yes.
very conservatively on the outside, and Hagler had tremendous stamina. So as far as Triple G wearing him down and overtaking him, I don't think he could overtake Hagler in the later rounds. This is not to say that Hagler would overtake Triple G. I think the term in a fight like that would be ring generalship. And I think Hagler's ring generalship would give him an edge.
I think that's a good point. He also fought 15 rounds. Gigi never had to do it. Not saying he can't do it, but he never did it.
I think certain fighters like a Roberto Duran would always give Hagler fits, At that, and
but Jack
would give Hagler fits too. But I think
it would be It would not be easy. But here's where I
wins a relatively close decision.
I agree with that. But here's where I don't like your formula. You say if they fight 7 times, he's going to win a couple. Well, Jack, if Houston plays Duke 7 times, they may win 2. But when that one game when they have to be at their best and they both have their A game, they're not going to beat them. So I try to go by if they both have their best night. Because how many series have there been where guys have fought 5 or 6 times? Not many.
Yeah, but if they both come with their absolute best, their A game, then Hagler wins the fight. Okay.
Would you agree?
I think it's a very tough fight. I think we might be talking about a fight that he wins 7 rounds to 5. That no knockdowns. That type of fight.
I agree with that. Would you agree with me? Because I said when I replied, I said, who are the great guys that Golovkin knocked out? The best guy he fought was barely 5'8", and even though I thought he won the first time, Canelo went the distance with him 3 times. And if he didn't knock out Canelo, he is not knocking out Marvin Hagler. And I also think Hagler fought many more punchers than Golovkin did. I'm trying to name the punchers he fought besides Canelo. I mean, somebody might say Curtis Stevens. Who else was a big banger that Golovkin fought? Who am I leaving out?
No one really that I could think of that comes to mind. I mean, listen, Danny Jacobs ran Golovkin close. You got to keep
and
that.
It wasn't a prime Jacobs either.
Right, and well, it was a good Danny Jacobs that night, but Danny Jacobs ran Canelo close. He just
excuse me.
He just couldn't get over the top.
But when you think of the punchers that Hagler fought on the way up, he fought Briscoe. He fought Cyclone Hart, who I was at the fight, and Hart actually shook him for a second. He fought Hearns. He fought Mugabe. And Juan Roldan was a big puncher and a strong guy, too. Those guys, other than Hagler, maybe Hearns once.
The 2 hardest punchers who Hagler faced were actually like back-to-back Hearns and Mugabe. Those are the 2 hardest punches.
Yes, I think Cyclone Hart's in the conversation, but I'll go with Hearns and Mugabe.
No. I agree in this sense, but I think Hart was past his prime. You know what Vito Antifermo told me? The 2 hardest punches he ever fought was Cyclone Hart and Eddie Mustafa Muhammad. He fought Mustafa Muhammad in the amateurs, and he sparred with him a lot. And he said it was very close. He'd give a tiny edge to Cyclone Hart, for pure punching power. Those were his 2 hardest. So you're right about Cyclone Hart.
Yes, everybody I talk to, I never sparred him, but everybody I talk to, and Russell Peltz thinks he has the best left hook of any Philly fighter ever. I would disagree with that, but I don't think it's a crazy statement.
Well, you're not Frank. It's okay you question me, but you're questioning Russell Peltz on Philadelphia fighters now. Yeah,
I disagree. Well, we disagree on a few things.
Russell's knowledge here. I mean, come on.
Well, Russell Peltz also agrees with me that, Harold Johnson would beat Bob Foster, and I think he thinks Harold Johnson would probably beat Beterbiev. I think there's a good argument there. I don't think you agree, but that's okay.
No, Harold Johnson's prime was a little before I really followed boxing closely. So I'm not an authority on Harold Johnson. I mean,
but when you watch the films and his opposition, you can get a good idea how good he was. Anybody that goes 14 rounds with Archie Moore and the distance, 4 times?
Well,
I think
no,
he's okay with Beterbiev.
Right. Moore beat him 4 out of 5, Harold Johnson, but with the
and stopped him once.
Moore stopped him in 14 rounds.
Right.
No, I mean, do we underrate Archie Moore? Do we overrate him? Good questions are coming out. There's so many fighters who are both overrated and underrated. Obviously, Tyson comes to mind.
Tyson and Marciano, to me, are the template.
Yeah. Oh, the most overrated, underrated, the most underrated, overrated, however you want to put, mix and match, But with Marvin Hagler, do we tend to overrate him a little bit? People say something like that, people get insulted. They take it personal. Like, how dare you? And I'm going to give you the thing that people take, and I'm not saying he was overrated. Don't take it out of context what I'm saying. But what people really get insulted, okay, is if a Floyd Mayweather says he's the best, he's better than Ali, that, people get all, riled up about it. They get insulted. But meanwhile, Ali is the same guy who called the old timers washerwomen. He'd say, oh, that slow shuffling Joe Louis.
Joe Louis, flat-footed, right?
He put all these guys down. So Mayweather's only doing to Ali what Ali did to them. What goes around
Jack,
comes around in a sense.
You made me 2 topics come to mind that you brought out, and let's focus on the one. I was thinking about this. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about this. What fighter or fighters do you think have, I don't want to say biggest baby fan base, but they're like the most offensive? Like, to me, I think Ali fans, Mayweather fans, maybe some Hagler fans. I think those guys, they just can't take and hear anything negative about the 3 fighters I've named. Who else would you put in that realm?
You say Ali, Mayweather, who else?
I think Ali, Mayweather, and Hagler come to mind when I think of, when it comes to, if there's something negative. I think the ardent fans of Ali, Mayweather, and Hagler felt they could walk on water, did no wrong, could never lose. And it's like, if you question their greatness on any level, you're a moron.
Yeah, I could see that to an extent. I really do. I don't answer many posts on social media. I might respond to someone like yourself and make a comment, back and forth. But if I don't know the people involved, I rarely respond to a post because it doesn't go anywhere. You have all this silly insanity. For example, they start talking Ali Frazier and say, oh, if Ali wasn't off 3 years, he just would have played with Frazier. Or, oh, if the referee didn't come in 7 seconds early, it saved Frazier from getting knocked out. I don't have
crazy
with these idiots, to go on and on with that stuff. But I do like to see what the majority says on the topic, that like who would have won between Mayweather and Leonard, or who is greater, Mayweather and Leonard. And you look at all the comments.
That's broken down by generations, I think.
Right. I don't think that they're hating on Mayweather there, but I notice Leonard has more support from his generation than Mayweather has in his, because I think the Mayweather generation looks at Sugar Ray Leonard as an icon, and they're willing to even put him ahead of Mayweather, unless it's a Mayweather fanatic. Okay? That's the difference involved. They can look at it objectively, or you could ask an opinion, who would have won between Hearns and Mayweather? And a lot of the modern people who grew up with Mayweather, more of them are going to say Hearns would have beaten Mayweather. I kind of get that feeling, like reading the posts or whatever.
I picked up on that too.
Right, but you do get this small percentage, maybe 20%, who Mayweather has as base, of his followers, maybe 10%, 15%. I'm just throwing a number. Who feel Mayweather was the greatest fight in boxing history, and you get the feeling it's current fighters. You get the feeling like a Terrence Crawford. If you ask him, he may have said, yeah, Floyd was maybe the greatest of all time. You get that.
And Mayweather's very complimentary of Crawford too.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Jack, it just slipped my mind. I was going to say about that with Mayweather and Hagler. Oh, I know. One, I don't want to talk to anybody that didn't live through, let's say, Leonard and Mayweather. You and I both saw them at their best. We can be the best judges. We didn't see Joe Louis. I've seen the films. I've read the articles. I've heard what the experts say. And as great as he was, we still can't envision Joe Louis because we didn't see him. Where we saw, pretty much from Ali on, as far as the heavyweights go, and probably from, say, Dick Tiger on or Giardello on, as far as the middleweight. So to me, that's one thing. You have to have seen them both. We can speak about that. We can't speak about Kid Gavilan. And here's something I got drawn. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just, Frank.
Oh.
Like Ali combing his hair. I wasn't going to cut you off. Frank, I speak when I want to cut you off. I'm not ashamed I cut it.
Okay. Okay. We touched on what I said last week about you have to go through the era, but here's a fight I had with a guy on social media. I think it was Saturday. And it was a post of the Four Kings, Leonard, Hagler, Hearns, and Duran. And it said, who was your favorite? And like I'm dope, I responded and said, I can't pick a favorite, but I'll say this much. Hearns and Duran were clearly the two most fearless of the four. And me and this guy got into it was somewhat civil debate about it. And I said, look, I love Sugar Ray Leonard, but he had a couple catchweight fights and picked his spots. I said, I love Hagler, but you know what? If I'm breaking ties, Marvin Hagler never left his comfort zone, and everybody had to come up to fight him. I said, Duran, think about Duran. You can make a case. Duran fought Leonard in his prime. He fought Hearns at his best weight, and he fought Hagler in the middle of his prime. Hearns fought Leonard in one of the biggest fights ever, fought Benitez when he was still good, mutilated Duran, challenged Hagler at his best, actually tried to fight Michael Spinks at one time, and then did move up and fight light heavyweight. So I said, if I'm breaking ties, as Ali used to say, who dared to dare, I think Hearns and Duran clearly dared more than Hagler or Leonard. So that was how I broke it down. I didn't say who my favorite was. I said, I think those two are the most fearless.
They are, but even the greatest fighters sometimes have a little fear. Like in talking to Michael Spinks, he said Butch Lewis, and him wanted to have a fight against Tommy Hearns. That Hearns, to move up to light heavyweight at the time and fight Michael. Hearns, I guess through Emmanuel Stewart or whatever, didn't want to know from it. It never got off the ground. Yet Hearns eventually moved up to light heavyweight when it was Dennis Andres, Virgil Hill. They were in as feared as Michael Spinks. They tried to get a fight with Marvin Hagler to move up to light heavyweight. Hagler wouldn't even entertain. They wouldn't even entertain.
And Spinks was wanting to come down to 68.
Yeah, but Hagler wouldn't even entertain a discussion about it. But in fairness to Hagler, if you're a career middleweight and that's your division, you're under zero obligation to change your weight class. You're middleweight. The heck with it.
Monzon never stepped up either.
Right. You don't have to step up. So I don't hold that against Hagler. Okay, some guys step up. When guys normally step up, it's economics a lot of the time, why they might move up in weight. And but styles do make fights. We hear that cliche. And, you talk about Mayweather and Leonard. I could say Leonard was the greater fighter. But Mayweather's style may have been wrong for Leonard. It may have been wrong because in Mayweather, you're talking about one of the greatest defensive fighters in boxing history. And Leonard had a lot of trouble with Benitez, a defensive master. But Mayweather could generate more consistent offense than Benitez. So I give Mayweather a genuine chance of upsetting Leonard at their best. Yeah, I'm not saying he would, but I give him a genuine chance, more than an outside chance, put it that way. It's a dogfight for Leonard because Mayweather, no one hits Mayweather with any consistency. You can't. The one guy that would be a nightmare for Mayweather is obviously, like you've said in the past, Tommy Hearns, because of his reach, this, that. The only way Mayweather could have defeated Hearns is if he showed us something, Frank, he's never shown us before.
Right.
And we don't know. The odds are he wouldn't have that. Maybe he would try to come on in the late rounds, but Mayweather's not a big puncher.
That would play into Hearns' hands.
But even if he came on in the late rounds and he went the distance, Hearns, in all probability, would have piled up enough points, enough rounds, and, and he would have beaten Mayweather.
Jack, I agree with you regarding Hagler. I'm not going to hold it against him. However, if it's close and I have to break a tie between who had more guts, Hagler, Hearns, or Duran, I'm going to go with Hearns and Duran because they didn't have to step up either, and they did. So, and Hagler didn't. That doesn't mean he was afraid to, but the bottom line is he never did. So I'm going to give the guy, as far as courage goes, to the guy that did step up. As far as Hearns, I'm sorry, Leonard and Mayweather, I do think Mayweather, the fact that he's not aggressive, he would force Leonard to fight as the aggressor. Ray can do that. I think Ray wins. I don't give Mayweather hardly a chance to win, but I do think it could go the distance, and Leonard would not look great in defeating him, but I just think he would overwhelm him and win. Whereas Hearns, Mayweather's at the end of that jab, and if he tries to get aggressive, then he does what Hearns wants and he comes into his power. So I give Hearns every shot in the world, and I'm making him 100-0 favorite over Mayweather.
Right, Frank, we got to look at things a different way, not like who stepped up, who avoided the hardest challenges, okay? Who tried to avoid opponents, stretch things out. And both Mayweather and Leonard are the same in that way. They're both guilty of it.
Leonard picked his spots.
They tried to manipulate scenarios. Hearns would just take on the toughest challenge, no questions asked. Duran would seem to be the same way. Duran and Hearns didn't play games.
Nope.
Leonard was a big game player. Mayweather was a big game player.
Because they could, Jack. They were the stars. They called the shots.
Hagler, he couldn't get a mega fight till late in his career. He beat Hearns. There wasn't really a demand for a rematch, And then
because he won one-sidedly.
And then Leonard, and then he couldn't get a rematch with Leonard, and he retired. So, so Hagler wasn't tested enough. He didn't have a monster like Golovkin challenging him where he would put the fight off, take a couple of other easier fights.
Right.
No, so I agree with you in that sense. Duran and Hearns were
They were fearless, Jack. They didn't care. And when you think about who they fought, and this came up in the conversation with my buddy, Duran fought Leonard at Leonard's just about his peak at 47. He fights Hearns at 156, which many believe that was Hearns' best weight. And then he fights Hagler in 83, right in the middle of his prime, right in the middle of his title reign. And he fared well. He didn't win, but he fared well. I guess I won the argument, and Jack just decided to bail out because he's no longer here. So I'm going to continue to talk because I know he's going to come back. I'm sure he's going to. This is a down period in boxing. It's hard to get excited. We try to find topics to talk about that maintain interest. There just aren't a lot of fights, if you look at the calendar, for the next couple months where there are big fights that we really care about. Tevin Farmer fought this week against Pedraza, and it was a rematch. And again, I know Tevin Farmer. I like him. I root for him. But I'm always certain that in a big spot, he's going to come up short and never come through. And I didn't bet the fight. I didn't talk about it. But I had no doubt in my mind that Tevin Farmer was going to get beat this weekend. I missed the women's fight with Michaela Meyer. I'm guilty of that. But again, as I said, there's just not that much going on. If you follow me on social media, you see I did a post, the George Foreman passing. Some people think I don't like George Foreman, and I'm a big George Foreman fan. My issue with him was I saw him sometimes behind stage, off camera. He wasn't always the nicest guy that you could meet. He was one of those guys when the camera was on, he was on. But sometimes behind the scene, he wasn't the greatest guy. But look, I'm the type person, if I was as famous as George Foreman, I would have a wall around me wherever I'd go because I would get bored and tired of everywhere I went by somebody wanting a piece of me and wanted either a picture, an autograph, or to talk about something. So I'm going to give him a pass there. But when it comes to him being a fighter, I have nothing but love for George Foreman. I watched him as a 10-year-old in 1968 fight in the Olympics where he won 4 fights. I think his first fight went the distance, and then he won by stoppage in his last 3. And if you think about that, now look, the Cubans weren't in the Olympics. They didn't participate in boxing until 1972. But the rest of the world had entrance there. All the European fighters were there, the West, the East, all those guys were there. And if you think about it, George Foreman only had, I think he was 18-3 or 18-4 as an amateur going into the Olympic Games. And he had only been boxing for like a year and 4 months. And he lost his first amateur fight. And then he comes on, and people don't realize the feat that was to win a gold medal with a year and a half experience. Jack, I'm talking about when you decided.
I've been backstage in the studio, Frank. I got a phone call, and for some reason the phone call cut me off, and I could see you talking, and I wasn't there. So I left the studio. I came back immediately, and I was waiting to be put on, and I just notified. Our producer just put me on. Okay, Linda, but I've been listening to you.
I was talking about, the passing of George Foreman, and it's apropos to talk about because there's not much else going on. You and I did a show maybe a year ago, and we talked about like what would shock the boxing world the most, what fighters, what stars. And Jack, George Foreman's passing, we grew up with him. And it just seemed like he was always going to be there. And the fact that he died so suddenly, and now that the big 3, they're all gone. It really is. it really hits you. At least it does with me. And then I think back of all the fights, the nights we had watching him. And Jack, when you think about his accomplishments, Olympics after a year and a half, when he beat Smokin' Joe. Smokin' Joe had just turned 29. He was 29-0 with 25 knockouts. Really hadn't taken a backward step in 29 fights. And I know it was a style matchup, and Frazier wasn't the same guy that fought Muhammad Ali a year and a half, almost 2 years before that. But Jack, who else does that to Smokin' Joe? I don't think anybody. And then to take the 10 years off and come back and win the title like almost 20 years to the day after losing to Ali. I mean, George Foreman had as great a career as any heavyweight who's ever lived.
Yeah, I have different eras. Like we discussed this even with Sonny Liston. If Ali didn't come along, and Liston could have extended his championship reign, let's say 3 more years, maybe gotten in like 8 title defenses against the top guys, where he might rate in heavyweight history. No, it's so much a circumstance. It's when you quit, when you get out. We were talking before about Roberto Duran. If he retired after the first Leonard fight, my feeling is he would right now go down in history as the top pound-for-pound fight of all time, because he wouldn't have been tarnished. There just would have been a blip of the De Jesus loss we stopped twice after. And that's what I think the perception would have been. Roy Jones, had he retired, after beating John Ruiz, where would we be rating him? I mean, and then you look at the fighters who fight too long, like an Ezra Charles. I mean,
25 losses.
Right. Some people call him one of the greatest of all time, but logically speaking, his name hardly comes up, when it comes to that. And but with Foreman, can we really rate him as the 3rd greatest heavyweight of all time? Ali and Lewis on their own category. If you look at eras, Lewis's longevity alone, okay?
And he was the best textbook heavyweight ever.
Right. And Ali took on the biggest challenges, and then you get the 2nd-tier guys. I mean, how do you rate?
Well, who has a case over Foreman, Jack? I'll listen to that. I have no doubt he's 3rd. If we were going to court and you had to pick a fighter to make a case over George Foreman for number 3, who would it be?
Let's say I said, let's throw some big names, Larry Holmes.
I kind of had a feeling you were going to say that. Okay. What would your case be? Why is he rank over Foreman?
My case is that Holmes had a long run, where he won his first 48 fights and was in his prime. I mean, he basically beat everybody. And he fought some good fighters. Even late in his prime, you win a close decision over Tim Witherspoon. That looks better than losing a decision to Jimmy Young.
Jack, but Tim Witherspoon only had 15 fights going into that fight.
But yeah,
he fought a lot of guys that had 15, 16, and 10 fights. You can't say anything about Foreman. So my next question would be, what are Holmes' best wins?
Well, you make a good point. I mean, I could say the Ali fight, but Ali was past it, But the point is, if you eliminate Ali's fight with Holmes, Ali never really had a terrible outing like that. That was his only awful outing. Even when he lost to Trevor Burbick, he was competitive. When he lost to Leon Spinks, he was competitive. He was non-competitive with Holmes.
I'm not going to make Holmes, and I'm a big Holmes fan, and I have him 4th. I'm not going to make him all-world because he beat Ali at 38 or 39, and I'm not going to make Tyson all-world because he beat a Holmes who hadn't fought in 2 years, who was 38 years old. But if you take Holmes' prime, 78 to 85, his best wins are who? Cooney, Norton, Witherspoon? Does that compare?
Well, Mike Weaver.
Jack, Mike Weaver had 9 losses.
No, but if you look at the names, he beat decent fighters.
He beat decent guys, but Foreman mutilated Frazier, mutilated Norton, knocked out Ron Lyle. Then he comes back and he knocks out Cooney, who took Holmes' life and death, and then he knocks out Michael Moore, who's undefeated to win the title. He loses a bad decision against a guy like Briggs. So Foreman's second career was clearly better than Holmes' second career. And I think their first career, I think Foreman has better wins. And I happen to think, and it's conjecture, I happen to think the best Foreman that I ever saw would have defeated the best Holmes. And I think it's a style thing because, Jack, most of the guys, except Leon Spinks, who put heat on Holmes, took him to the brink. And he never fought anybody like Foreman.
Did Foreman beat more quality fighters than Lennox Lewis, for example?
That's a good argument. That's a good argument. Maybe Lennox Lewis deserves some consideration for that third or fourth spot, too.
Lewis knocked out a good Razor Ruddock in 2 rounds. He stopped Scalata in 1 round. I mean, Tommy Morrison was a decent fighter who beat Foreman the second coming. He dominated him. There were the 2 losses where Lewis got stopped, but he won rematches against them. You know, I mean, there were the Holyfield fights, which his size played a big part in it, obviously, but he got the better Holyfield. Tyson was past his prime, but still, you know, an okay fighter. He dominated Tyson. He beat a good Vitaly Klitschko. You know, even though his Manny was less than dominant, you know, he managed to get.
He never wait. Look, he took the fight on short notice, as Klitschko did. He was never heavier. And even though he lost more rounds than he won, the bottom line is he won the fight, and that was clear. Jack, I think the argument should be who is ahead between Lennox Lewis or Larry Holmes. And I think your argument with Lewis against Foreman is valid. I like Foreman better, and I think he has a better case. But Holmes and Lewis, to me, is a real tough one because Lewis clearly beat more quality fighters than Holmes did.
Yeah, you know, funny, the second coming of Holmes had some decent wins. They won world beaters, Lou Savarese, Alex Stewart. But he, you know, they were top 10 heavyweights at the time.
You mean Foreman?
Foreman, I mean, yeah.
Right.
So in the Michael Moore fight, even though he seemed to be losing every second, he did get the job done, got a knockout over Moore. Moore had a weak chin, but that's irrelevant. He got the job done, especially at his age. I mean, I think the thing that makes Foreman stand out is what he did at an advanced age. No other fight in boxing history could be that effective into an advanced stage.
Absolutely not.
How about this, Frank? If we talked about like they have a running, the Masters division, 40 and up. Who is the greatest 40-plus fight of all time? Was it Hopkins? Was it Foreman or what?
I think it was Hopkins because he went to 50 and he outboxed guys. George got outboxed a lot and just won on brute strength.
Yeah. Okay.
But your point with Lennox Lewis was good, Jack, and I think that's a good argument. And I have Lennox Lewis top 10, and I'll throw one at you. I think it's pretty much unanimous that Ali probably fought the best opposition of any heavyweight champ.
Who did you say?
Ali.
Ali fought the best opposition. That's what distinguishes Ali from Joe Louis. And that's
right.
What gives Ali the edge. Now, Lewis fought top-of-the-line fighters. Don't misunderstand me. He fought the whole list of heavyweight champions from 1930. Schmeling, Sharkey, Carnera, Babb, Braddock. But he did have the major blip against Max Schmeling. We can't forget that, even though he knocks him out
before he was the champ.
Right, but the point is, that looks bad. That he lost that fight. Now, a lot of great fighters, all-time greats, have the one fight where it looks like they're going to lose, but they somehow rally and get a win. Even we talked about Leonard before against Marcus Geraldo. It looked like Geraldo was going to overpower him. Even Leonard said it was complete desperation. and you could tell Leonard it was a desperate situation for Leonard, but he managed to, get the job done. Lewis didn't get it done against Schmeling in the first fight.
He wasn't at his best. He was out playing golf a lot. Schmeling is a former champ.
His darn fault he was playing golf. I don't give him a pass, Frank.
All right, Jack, but come on. He mutilated him in the second fight.
Yeah, he was better than Schmeling, but that's the point I was trying to make before. If fighters are fighting 10 times, a lot of times one guy will beat another one. I was hanging out with Jim Watt once, and he was talking to me about losing to Alexis Aguayo, and he said, I got to admit, Aguayo was just better than I was. Case closed. So I said, Jim, if you fought him 20 times, do you think you could win 2 or 3? He says, yeah, if I fought him 20 times, I could beat him 3 times out of 20. I mean, I'm not and chances are, he might beat him 3 out of 20. Rob was a good fighter. But some guys will never beat the other guy no matter what. Arturo Gatti against Floyd Mayweather. Someone asked me before the fight what I thought, and I blundered. I said if they fought 25 times, Mayweather would win 24 out of 25. What was I thinking? Mayweather
He'd win 25.
25. Gatti wouldn't beat him once out of 100, Unless that's a good over and under thing, if Mayweather could have the flu or something, And I respect the heck out of Arturo Gatti. Now, if you put Gatti in against a Ray Mancini, a Greg Hagen, guys like that.
Yeah, they're tough fights.
Even if you put Gatti in against Aguayo, maybe Gatti nails him at some point.
Oh, Jack, I don't think 135. That's tough. That's a tough one, I think.
That's a tough.
Gaddy's right there. He walks right into those right hands. I know he's tough.
Aguayo would dominate. Aguayo would dominate him, but it's not. Listen, certain guys are never going to be certain. Now, look, if Tommy Hearns fought Marvin Hagler 10 times, he's never beating him. He's not beating him 1 out of 10.
You don't think he would beat him once in 10 times?
No, not it.
I think he would.
Not the Hagler who beat Hearns. That Hagler was.
But would Hagler be that guy all 10 nights?
Oh yeah, that Hagler beats Hearns all 10. Hearns would switch up his style. He would box. He would move. Hagler would get him 8, 9, 10 rounds. Would stop him. Eventually catch up to him one way or the other.
People don't talk about it that much, and it's a little redundant because it was the only choice that Hagler had. But Jack, that was one of the greatest strategy adjustments of a fighter in any big fight. The fact that he came out like he did against Hearns, because I really believe Hagler knew if I sit here and try to box him or I wait on him, he's going to pick me apart. I got to rush him and make this a back alley brawl. I have the chin where I'm willing to take the chance to do it. I think that was a great strategy adjustment.
That Hagler would have beaten Leonard. The Hagler who beat Hearns would have beaten the Leonard who beat him. Because he would have came.
It's pretty hard picturing that Hagler losing to Leonard.
Yeah. One controversy I've been seeing on social media a number of times, it's come up, and I kind of want to clear it up with Ali against Norton, the first fight, when Ali broke his jaw. Now you're hearing from like an Eddie Futch, impossible. It happened in the first, the second round. I believe that Eddie Futch said it happened late in the fight, like
the 11th round. He said.
No, but I remember Howard Cosell talking about Ali's jaw, that something seemed to be off early in the fight.
Second or third round, bleeding inside his mouth.
That's what I recall. So
same here.
Indicates to me Ali did injure his jaw early in the fight, and then in round 12, Norton hit him some heavy shots on the jaw, and I think that damaged it further. But I think there was a fracture early in the fight.
Jack, did you ever have your jaw broken? Okay. Alex Ramos broke my jaw sparring in 1982. He caught me in the second round with a right hand on the chin with my mouth open. I thought he broke my teeth. They said my teeth weren't broken. We sparred another round. I can't imagine if Ali's jaw was broken in the second round and he fought a beast like Ken Norton for 10 more rounds with a broken jaw. He has to be the toughest man who ever walked this earth.
Well, Ali was incredibly tough, number one. Number two, consider this. When the fight was going on, this wasn't the Ken Norton that we know now. He was just another guy to Ali.
But Norton was coming on like a tiger, Jack, like a shark smelling blood in the end.
No, at the end of the fight, yeah. But I'm saying during the fight, Ali, all along, he wasn't fighting the Norton he knew later on. That would be really tough. It's his own way of thinking, I'm probably so superior to this guy, I could beat him with one arm. After 3 fights with Norton, he came to the conclusion, wow, I have nothing on Norton, or whatever. But, and it goes back to you talking about Foreman. Reportedly, Ali called Foreman up and he asked, Foreman to take, put Norton out of commission for him because he knew that Foreman was going to, would always beat Norton.
Norton was his Achilles. Do you remember and it is the anniversary today of that fight of Ali Norton. That was in 73. So it's 52 years today. It was a Saturday afternoon. It was Ali's first fight on TV since I think his fight with Carl Mildenberger. And do you recall reading that Dundee actually wanted to stop the fight? And Ali said, if you stop the fight, you'll never work with me again.
Well, which fight was this?
The Norton fight. Like after the third or fourth round when he saw the blood coming from inside his mouth.
I don't recall that story.
I read that a few times, Jack. That Dundee was mentioned to him about stopping the fight. Now he said, you stop the fight, you'll never work with me again.
Yeah, I think reportedly during the fight, Herbert Muhammad was involved or something. These could just be rumors. This is what you saw during one of the movies. Or
well, during the fight, the Cosell was talking to Cosell. Cosell was talking to Dundee, and Dundee said, hey, he's got a little cut in the mouth. He's got some bleed, but no, he's okay. But Dundee always played it like that. He never overreacted.
Yeah, especially you don't want the opposition to get word. Because if Norton felt Ali's jaw was broken in any way, he'd be aiming for it the whole time.
It's funny, Jack. When my jaw broke, it didn't hurt. The punch didn't hurt. I just heard a crack. And I thought, I just got a busted tooth.
Could you have fought rounds if you had to in a real fight?
What's that?
How much more could you have continued boxing when your jaw got broken?
If that were a real fight? Not much. Now, and remember, we had on 14-ounce gloves.
Keep this in mind. If you don't know whether your jaw is broken and you just feel it hurts, that increases your chances of being able to fight longer because you don't know the situation as is.
I think I couldn't have made it much longer. I don't think. I don't. And with the small gloves, now maybe the adrenaline of a fight might have kept me going where we were just sparring, but I don't think I could have gone much longer. First of all, Alex is a really hard puncher, and he caught me with a right hand coming in right here, and my mouth was open, and I heard the crack, and I thought, that doesn't sound good, but I didn't want to let him know it that I was hurt anyway, and then I didn't say nothing between rounds. Then we did it again, and after the third round, I had a hard time opening my mouth to get my mouthpiece out, and I went from there right to the hospital on Broad Street. I forget the name of the hospital, but I went right to the hospital.
I just want to have a shout out, even though I haven't been in communication with them for a long time. Alex Ramos and Jackie Richardson. Jackie Richardson and her husband. What great humanitarians. They took Alex Ramos in, and the way Jackie Richardson explained it to me a lot of years ago, she went to a boxing function and she saw the way people weren't paying attention to Alex Ramos the way, she thought they should have. And they took him in. He's lived with them. He's been like part of the family for so long. And it's great humanitarian.
Jack, you know this better than I do. Remember what a star he was back in the late 70s and 80s?
As an amateur.
4-time Golden Glove champ, knocked out the Russian on TV.
Yeah, it's like in football. We're going to have the NFL draft in a few weeks. And some of the players projected to be stars aren't going to quite be there. Their career's not going to quite pan out. It didn't quite pan out for Alex Ramos. At the end, he didn't do anything wrong. It just wasn't quite good enough. He was good, and he fought for a version of a world title once, but he wasn't just quite good enough. There's no prime there. He was still a good fighter. He got a top 10 ranking. Kudos to him. He got inducted into the New York State Boxing Hall of Fame years ago. So,
Do you remember the 3 middleweights were Ayala, Bobby, Chez, and Ramos?
Yeah.
Who did you think was the best of those 3?
I don't remember who I thought at the time. Obviously, if I had to put stock in anyone, if I knew that their career was going to take place, it would be Tony Ayala, I think, But, Chez had a highly successful career.
Chez was the most successful of the 3 of them.
Yeah, Tony Ayala is one of these mystery guys. What if he lived a clean life? He probably wouldn't have had the amount of rage he had, so that may have affected him as a fighter, ironically. Okay, but let's say Ayala never went to jail, and he was still the same madman, and his career would continue. How far would he have gone? He would have gone very far. He would have beaten Davey Moore without a doubt. Okay?
I think he would have won the junior middleweight title.
Okay, but let's say he runs into Mike McCallum. He runs into master boxer for all.
That would be it. That's a great what if fight, but McCallum has to get the benefit of the doubt now, based on the way their careers played out.
The wild man Tony Ayala would have a fit in the ring and probably get suspended for hitting someone when the decision is announced in McCallum's favor.
You know who he would have matched up well against if they would have fought for the junior middleweight title? Duran.
Duran is such a great fighter. I couldn't go with Tony Ayala to run him out of the ring.
I remember when that fight was talked about, Jack. There was a part of me that was leaning towards Ayala.
Maybe Ayala wins the fight. Maybe he wins by decision. Could he fight hard the full 12 rounds?
I think he's one of the few guys that could have backed Duran up.
Stopped him, you're saying?
I'm not sure stop him, but maybe just get the better him enough in enough exchanges where it would be the difference.
I could tell you who Ayala could have upset style-wise. Tommy Hearns.
If he caught him?
I just feel with the rage, Ayala would take a good punch. He would be there. If he fought like the maniac,
But, Jack, I think Hearns lands first because of that long reach. And Ayala has to come to him. Those were the guys when I boxed that bothered me the most. The sluggers, the swarmers, the punchers didn't bother me more. But the guys that were long, with that long jab in the right hand, I had the Jerry Quarry disease, Jack. I would get hit, then move my head.
Yeah, well, the Jerry, yeah. But, you speculate, but I remember Manuel Stewart telling me Ricardo Mayorga would have given Tommy Hearns absolute fits. It was a bad style matchup for Hearns.
Because of the awkwardness?
Yeah, but the awkwardness. If a guy could come at Hearns like an absolute bull and take a great punch, those are the guys that would give him, the most trouble, as opposed to someone who would stand there, box, and go skill against skill. But, but Ayala is a great what-if fighter, too. But obviously he would have been, like Iabuchi. I don't know how far he would have really gone, but he was good. He was good. Maybe he wins the heavyweight title at some point.
Think about this, Jack. Even though he only had 20 fights, In those 20 fights, he managed to beat and stop the slickest boxer out there in Bird, and he went toe-to-toe with the biggest puncher in Tua. Bayabuchi had all the potential in the world as a boxer puncher. That kid was good. It's a shame he was a wacko and went off the deep end, but he would have been a force.
Yeah. I mean, we could. It's certain fighters like him and Tony Ayala. We know how good they would have been. Okay. The question is, would they have been the very best? You know.
Right.
Yeah. Could Ayala have beaten a Sugar Ray Leonard at some point? You know, those are the answers we'll never know. I don't think so, but I don't rule that possibility out. But we'll never find out. Same with Ike. Who knows whether he would have, beaten a Lennox Lewis even. I mean, we'll never know. I don't think so, but I don't rule out the possibility.
Jack, we're out of time. It was great speaking to you. We will speak next week. We'll try to drum up some topics to keep your interest with not much going on. Until then, thanks for watching, everybody.